Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I want to talk about the 2026 Ohio Senate race between Jon Husted and Democrat Sherrod Brown. And as you see the title of the video, I want to talk about the Senate race and sort of what's going on here and what is this race currently shaping up to be? Because this is a very fascinating race, and one that I'm going to show you later on in the video on the 2026 Senate map actually plays a very important role in what will ultimately happen and which party will control the majority in the U.S. Senate. So the 2026 Ohio Senate race, if you're unfamiliar, is open because this is the seat that was held by J.D. Vance, who became the Vice President of the United States. The Republican Lieutenant Governor Jon Husted gets appointed by the Governor Mike DeWine to be the senator, and he is running for now the rest of the term in the special election in November. Now, what's interesting about this race is typically in an election like this in Ohio, there wouldn't really be a top Democratic candidate that could run due to the fact that Republicans have been winning pretty strongly across the last few elections in Ohio. But in 2024, there was just a Senate race where the Democratic incumbent Senator Sherrod Brown, who he had been in office for a very long time as senator, I remember, won re-election in 2018 by about 6.8% against his Republican opponent. Back in 2012, he won a tough election against the Republican candidate then, Josh Mandel, as well in that election. And then going back to then, I think you'd have to go back to 2006, I believe it was, where he first got elected, defeating then Republican Senator Mike DeWine. So Sherrod Brown's had a long history in Ohio politics at the Senate level, serving since 2006, and he loses in a very close election against Bernie Moreno, the Republican challenger, 50.09% to 46.48% in the 2024 election. Now, there are a few things that I do need to point out here. Number one, it's important to mention the context of 2024, as Donald Trump won the state of Ohio at the top of the ticket by about 11.2%. And when you look at how Trump did in these places like Lake County, which used to be a toss-up that even Obama, I believe, beat Romney in 2012, or it was very barely voting for Romney by about 0.9, you can go 12 years later, Trump is winning it by 14.3%. It was a very solid Republican state at 11.2% of the vote. Sherrod Brown still put up a very significant fight in the state of Ohio, despite losing by roughly about 3.5% statewide in this very close race. So now comes 2026, where the now appointed Republican U.S. Senator Jon Husted is taking on Sherrod Brown. Now, this is a very interesting race because based on as of today, the markets and the polling are showing two actually different stories right now. It's very close on the polling side, but including a new poll that I want to talk about, Jon Husted is now leading in the polling averages 48.6 to Sherrod Brown's 45.8. So overall, it's roughly about a 3-point lead for Husted as of right now. The most recent poll from YouGov in Bowling Green State, with a sample size of about 1,000 registered voters, shows Jon Husted at 50%, Sherrod Brown at 47%, which when you compare that to the 2024 results of the Senate race is pretty similar to what it ended up being. Whereas 50.09, you can argue that's 50.1, and then 46.58, that'd be about 46.5. So by doing that, you can round up, it'd be about 50-47. It's right around the same margin of what 2024 ended up being. Now, there's a lot of talk about the midterms for 2026, what type of election they're going to be like. Is it going to be a Democratic wave? And if it is, by how much? Do Republicans break historical trends and find a way to do better than expected? Right now, I think the best estimate we have, in my personal interpretation of this, is the current state of the polling of President Trump suggests the Republicans should really be in for a lot of trouble. His current approval rating as of today is 40%. Average disapproval is 56.9%. And that was after the morning consult poll from the 17th to the 20th, which showed Trump down by 9 points, 44 to 53, which on the average is actually one of Trump's better numbers that he's seen in recent times. So Ohio is a state that at its core right now seems to be a likely Republican state. But the governor election and the Senate election for 2026 are still shaping up to be very competitive. But the most recent polling data shows Jon Husted holds a lead over Sherrod Brown right now. But the political markets for specifically Kalshi and the Kalshi odds, a lot of people are kind of banking on Sherrod Brown actually pulling off the win in this race. And this has kind of baffled me a little bit because I do still think, given how red Ohio is, and Sherrod Brown did just lose in 2024, I would have Jon Husted favored to win in this race. But seeing Sherrod Brown be narrowly favored to win, now granted, when it comes to political like election odds like Kalshi or Polymarket, 58 to 43, I mean, obviously that's essentially 50-50 of a race, so people are very split, and if they think it's going to be the Democrat or the Republican, you really can't get much closer than this when you're looking at markets versus polling. Polling and markets are kind of very different things, but it is interesting, and it caught my eye that Sherrod Brown's actually leading here. And this race, I think, really comes down to ultimately what kind of Ohio are we getting in 2026? Because if it's the Ohio of 2024, or even you can look at the Senate race of Ohio in 2022, where then candidate J.D. Vance defeated former U.S. Representative Tim Ryan 53.06 to 46.94. This was seen as sort of a shock at the time, was that J.D. Vance was not polling very strongly coming out of the Republican primary in the general election, and it was shaping up to be a pretty close race, one that in a Republican midterm of 2022, the Republicans should have won by more. And then 2024, Bernie Moreno, who's also sort of seen as more of a weaker Republican candidate compared to some of the other potential Republican candidates, wins by about 3.5%. What does this mean for 2026? Well, given the metrics of Jon Husted now being the incumbent, the Republicans do have a stronger candidate this time around than Bernie Moreno in 2024. And Sherrod Brown does not have the advantage of running as an incumbent U.S. Senator in 2026. That being said, Sherrod Brown has the track record of running for Senate in 2006, 2012, 2018, and he was just on the ballot in 2004, in an election where you have to remember pretty much everything swung to the Republicans in 2024. We can even look here at the shift from 2020 to 2024. Pretty much everywhere in the United States, except for Nebraska's 1st district, shifted towards Donald Trump at the presidential level. Ohio, which voted for Trump very strongly in 2020 for Trump by about 8 points, still moved another 3.2% to Trump's direction. So Ohio, if we're talking about 2026, the Democrats would probably be in a stronger position than 2024, just given the fact of how strongly the country and Ohio shifted to the right in 2024. But will it be enough for Sherrod Brown to ultimately win? The polling average currently suggests that Jon Husted has a narrow lead of about 3 points, still 48.6 to 45.8. That does suggest there's a decent amount of, I would say, independent or voters not saying who they're supporting at this current point in time, where Sherrod Brown could ultimately get enough of these votes and come back. But it's kind of getting not really to crunch time because we're still in April, but there's not really a ton of wiggle room for Brown to pull off the upset here. For the Democrats' best chance at winning the Senate race, they need a Democratic wave election. It's very similar to 2018, but given the context of the 2024 election. Because I don't think we're going to see a Senate race like we did in 2018. We can look at the Senate map. Sherrod Brown won the Senate race by roughly about 6.8% as the Democratic incumbent. That Ohio and that Sherrod Brown is just not a possibility in 2026 for the Democrats. But is there a possibility the Democrats have a good enough night where Sherrod Brown can eke out like a 1-point victory in Ohio? At very least, it's possible, and the conversation is worth having. But Jon Husted, at this current point in time, is polling about 3.5 points up. And I want to show you the 2024 race. I think it's important. The only market information they had started by about October 8th of 2024. And at that time, Sherrod Brown was narrowly favored over Bernie Moreno, 52 to 48.2. And then by about October 16th, Bernie Moreno pulled ahead. It remained decently competitive, but Moreno always held the lead from then on. In terms of the overall forecast projection, it was listed as a toss-up race with a projected margin of 1.8, and ultimately Moreno ended up winning by about 3.5. So for this race for 2026, it is interesting that we're still obviously very early on. You can see in the last few months or so, it's been 50-50 between Husted and Sherrod Brown and the polling. 48 to 46.5, tied around 46, 47. Ohio seems to have this trend in the past few Senate races in 2022 and 2024 of sort of showing a very tight race, and the Republicans seem to outperform those polling numbers at the end on Election Day. Now, granted, that was in 2022 and 2024, two elections you would argue would be more Republican favored. 2026 will be the first test of that in an election that's Democratically favored. So it's going to be very interesting to see how it goes. It is a good sign for the Republicans that Jon Husted is leading in the primary right now, especially when you look nationwide, and in a lot of places the Republican incumbent is not leading. So Jon Husted against the former Democratic Senator and Sherrod Brown leading by roughly about 3 points is good news for the Republican. But Ohio is very interesting, and an interesting Senate race I'm watching very closely, because I also think it has some very important ramifications for the 2026 Senate map, and I'm going to explain why. If we go through and give the states that are currently projected to be safe for their respective parties, we're going to do the Democratic seats first and just get these out of the way here. Brings the Democrats up to about 100% safe seats. On the Republican side, if we did the same thing and just went through all of them, Kansas, I do think is still safe for now. I did see there was a poll by one of the Democratic candidates, I believe, that showed it being competitive, but until I see more there, it's probably going to be a safe race. Florida, for the sake of argument, I'm just going to put in safe Republican. This puts the Republicans up at 46, Democrats at 43. Democrats, I think, are likely favored in Minnesota as well. For now, we're going to put New Hampshire just in lean Democratic. You could argue likely. I'm going to put it in lean for now. This puts the Democrats up to 45. Republicans, I still think in Nebraska, are favored against Dan Osborne by a likely to lean margin. I'm going to put it in likely for now. And we'll start there. Republicans are at 47. Democrats are at 45. Now, they're the main toss-ups going into this election were North Carolina with Tom Tillis, Georgia with Jon Ossoff, Michigan with Gary Peters retiring, and Susan Collins in Maine. Based on the current polling data as of right now, Georgia, Jon Ossoff is leading, and not only by 5 points, but actually leading by a little bit over 5 points in the most recent poll. So Georgia, which looked like at a time the Republicans' best pickup opportunity, and arguably the most Republican of the potential Democratic pickups in terms of states in 2024 over Michigan, it's actually looking like it's likely Democratic right now. North Carolina, Roy Cooper versus Michael Whatley, a recent poll showed it getting a little bit tighter, but Cooper is still leading by more than 5 points in most polling averages in North Carolina. A new poll that just came out of Maine has Susan Collins versus Graham Plattner, and that one also has the Democrat currently leading by over 5 points. This would get the Democrats up to 48 Senate seats, where the Republicans are still at 47. Now, the Republicans do have overall a favorable map in terms of what's left. You have places like Ohio, Iowa, Texas, Alaska, the places that all voted for Donald Trump by double digits in 2024, but these Senate races are more uniquely competitive than they maybe otherwise would be. Michigan, it was very close in 2024, less than half a percentage point, 0.3%, but without Donald Trump at the top of the ticket driving turnout and being more of a Democratic wave year, could the Democrats at the bare minimum win the state of Michigan by, say, I don't know, like 2 points or 3 points in that Senate race? Let's just say for the hypothetical argument they do. Democrats are at 49, Republicans are at 47. Let's say Mary Peltola running in Alaska, a very unique candidate to Alaska. There are very few Democrats that can make Alaska at the Senate level competitive. Peltola is one of them. What if Peltola finds a way to beat Dan Sullivan, which I'm not saying she will, I'm saying hypothetically, let's say she does. If she does, the Democrats are up to 50 Senate seats. They're already basically almost there to blocking everything the president and the Republicans in the Senate want to do. The rules in the U.S. Senate are if a 50-50 tie takes place, the Vice President of the United States breaks all ties as the President of the Senate. So J.D. Vance holds the tiebreaker. So even though getting to 50 Senate seats would be great for the Democrats and a 2028 Senate majority flip is almost all but guaranteed at that point, there's still a possibility the Republicans could lose the Senate in 2026. The top 3 targets left then for the Democrats are Ohio, Iowa, and Texas. Now, I think it goes without saying, the one I think is least likely to flip would be the state of Iowa. Ashley Hinson is running for Joni Ernst's Senate seat, and I think she's going to win and probably win there without too much of a problem. There have been some internal Democratic polls showing the race to be competitive, but Iowa's polling is sort of historically very wonky. But I do think Iowa does ultimately still remain in the Republican category. Texas is going to be interesting. If it's James Talarico versus Ken Paxton, it gives the Democrats a better chance at winning that race, as Ken Paxton has a lot of scandals. But again, you're asking the state of Texas, which, yes, it was very competitive in 2018, under 3 points for Ted Cruz versus Beto O'Rourke. Does it still ultimately flip, though? For now, I'm going to say, for the sake of argument, it doesn't. It remains in the Republican category in lean Republican. The Senate is then 50 Democrats, Republicans at 49. The fate of the entire Senate majority for the Republicans or flipping for the Democrats could all literally come down to the state of Ohio. Now, it seems obviously maybe a little far-fetched a few months ago. You're looking at blue Alaska, very blue North Carolina, very blue Georgia, very blue Michigan, very blue Maine. But the current polling in these Senate races right now, if the elections were held today, the political prediction markets like Kalshi and the polling averages all show this map right now, where the latest polling average, Jon Husted over Sherrod Brown, the Republicans winning here would give a 50-50 divided Senate. But if the political prediction market's right and the polling average is wrong and Sherrod Brown were to win, the Democrats would actually go from being at 47 Senate seats to flipping the U.S. Senate and now having 51 Senate seats, flipping big wins in North Carolina, in Maine, in Alaska, and in Ohio. And maybe even potentially opening the door for more competitive races in Texas and Iowa that could flip. I'm not banking on those flipping. I think Ohio is more likely than Texas or Iowa, but the conversation could be there. So Ohio, a Senate race between an incumbent U.S. Senator who was appointed, not elected. That is a very important caveat. We saw something similar with Martha McSally in Arizona, where she was not elected when she was appointed senator and ultimately lost. Even though, to be fair in that race, I don't believe she was elected previously, whereas Jon Husted was the lieutenant governor, so I guess he was technically on the ballot, but still, him facing against a former U.S. Senator who just got 46.5% of the vote in 2024 in a more democratically favored election environment, with all things considered, it sets up a very interesting race where Ohio, a former marquee toss-up battleground of the early 2000s and the 2010s, and one that's become a very reliable Republican state in the Donald Trump era, could very well give the Democrats the Senate majority in 2026 if it reverts back to its toss-up roots. Or it could be the state in the Donald Trump era that comes through for Donald Trump and ultimately holds the Senate for the Republicans by the absolute thinnest of margins. So the Senate race in Ohio is absolutely fascinating to me, whether it's Sherrod Brown and the markets are right, whether it's the polling averages are right and Jon Husted pulls off the win. It's a very fascinating race to me, and one that I'm definitely keeping a close eye on, because if you're watching it like I am, it literally could decide which party ends up holding the Senate. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it interesting. Make sure to like and subscribe, and also leave a comment below. Tell me what you think of the Senate race. Who do you think will pull it off, Jon Husted or Sherrod Brown? And which party do you think will hold the Senate after 2026, the Republicans or the Democrats? Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in a future video.